podcast where we bring you thought leaders from around the world so you can share their inspirational stories and empowering practical tools on spirituality, mindset, self-love, being master of your own reality, purpose, business and lifestyle, and so much more. Everything from these beautiful people is so heart-centered and so freaking wise and so damn valuable that people usually pay really big bucks for their coaching. And I bring it to you for free so that you can have the most inspired life possible. So listen ahead for our latest guest, and I'll see you on the other side.
Hello and welcome to another episode of An Inspired Life, where we find freedom and purpose by embracing our divine essence. And I am so excited to have Jennifer Hansen on the show today. She is an international healer, a speaker, a teacher, and a soon-to-be author. Her unique gift of bringing through transformational healing energies touches thousands of lives the world over. For 18 years, she has been deeply immersed in the path of cellular purification and enlightenment, pioneering research on how our universe works. Oh my God, I love talking about this stuff through the lens of cellular healing and divine consciousness. So I'm really excited. We're going to be talking about this cellular purification. And Jennifer was telling me that as she purified her own cellular memories, I'm like, we're going to find out more about it, right? But as she did that process for herself, she awakened her own unique spiritual gifts, and she's now invited all over the world, just from her vibration, I guess, is that attractive and magnetic. So the more that we can purify ourselves and become attracting magnets for what we desire, that sounds really cool to me. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me, Kiara. It's a pleasure.
So I'm really excited because it just sounds like a new take on stuff that is already what I know to be really powerful. And actually, before we begin talking about cellular purification, would you mind sharing with us your journey of your story? Who were you before? Who were you when you found this purification? And who are you now? That would be awesome.
Absolutely. Well, I currently live in Texas, near Austin, but I grew up in Northern Ireland, near Belfast. And my time growing up there was extremely challenging. There was the Civil War taking place, and I was blessed enough to be raised by parents who were on both sides of the conflict, one Catholic, one Protestant, but they renounced their religious affiliation. So I was raised atheist, which had its pros in a war-torn country, a religiously war-torn country, but had its cons in the sense that I didn't have any kind of bond or connection with anything unseen. So having the challenges that I experienced, bulimia, I went through many different eating disorders, but bulimia was the main one. A lot of depression, suicidal feelings, addictions, kind of the whole gamut of chronic fatigue. It was hard going. A lot of bombs and shootings and things happening the whole time I was growing up. So it was pretty intense. And obviously, in hindsight, came to realize that I'm exceptionally sensitive, as many of us are. So like a big sponge, was absorbing a lot of that disconnection that was operating around me. And so my lights almost went out by the time I hit about 20. And I had to do something. I had to do something. I also experienced a gang rape and kind of just was at the end of my road. And that was when I was at a meditation circle. I started looking into New Age stuff and thought it was all a bit airy-fairy at first and didn't quite understand it, but went to a meditation circle, met this gentleman who talked about this American teacher healer who worked with cellular memory. And I was like, sign me up, where can I meet him? And I want to do his work. And I didn't know why I was saying that. I just felt like a massive yes in my whole body. So about 6 months later, my teacher, he arrived in Belfast and I went along to his workshop, and within 30 minutes, I just knew there was something so profoundly magical happening in that room. And all we were doing was sitting in a circle. The teacher was, I don't know what he was talking about, but he certainly wasn't, there were no hands-on things happening. And yet I started having a cathartic release that initially scared me, to be honest, but at the same time opened my eyes and blew my mind. And So after about 30 minutes of this tremendous, powerful, cathartic release in my body that I'd never experienced before, the only thing I could really affiliate it with was times on ecstasy and other types of drugs. But I just remember thinking, I need to know how he can do this. Like, what is it and how does he do it? And if I commit to this path and to learning how the universe works in this way, what do I have to go through and what's that going to take? So I guess you could say it was like a soul contract. That was it. I sold everything I owned. I got my visa for the US, and within 6 months was there with him and his then wife and family. And I just couldn't get enough. I was hooked. And what I was hooked by was the power of this intelligence, this intelligent language of energy, the light, the creator, the Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it, has infinite number of names. We call it the Great Spirit or the light. And the effect that it had in my body was something that I couldn't find anywhere else. No amount of talk therapy. I'd been seeing psychiatrists for years, and no amount of yoga, no amount of meditating, Reiki, color therapy, you name it. Like, I had done, not everything, but I had dabbled in things, and even nutrition and diet. It just wasn't enough to get to the hardcore chronic issues that I was dealing with. And the experience of working with this energy that he, whom I later married and I'm currently separating from, but became my teacher for 18 years, he somehow had access to this powerhouse of energy that when it hit my body, it was no joke, no messing around, nothing airy-fairy or frilly about it. It was just boom, take this seriously. And it got in there and pulled out the deepest roots of feelings, imprints of feelings, like as if we're an onion and we have all these different layers. And when the light would hit my body at the cellular level, these layers of memory would start peeling off. And at first, I remember the first year or two with the agony that I had grown up in, and the tension and the stress and paranoia and hatred and fear. I had a lot of physical pain. I struggled to just sit on the chair in the healing space for a weekend workshop. I remember it would feel crippled, but those were the layers peeling off and out. Even sciatic nerve pain, I remember, and pain in my knees, and just peeling out and off. And then it started to go deeper into some of those fundamental underlying emotions that feel like they had been my best friend for my whole life. Deep shame, like incredible shame, and shame and fear predominantly. And I needed someone who had done their work, not at the head level, not sitting in front of a bunch of textbooks and listening to professors teach their knowledge from a purely intellectual perspective. But I was lucky enough to create a teacher who had taken his body through purification, who had done the work through the body at the cellular level, because that's what I realized I needed to be able to purify me at that body level, so that it wasn't talk therapy. It was much, much, much more. And so when I talk about cellular purification, it's really, I committed to taking my body through this metamorphosis that is not something you get a certificate for at the end of 2 weekend workshops. I mean, this is an enlightenment lifestyle. It's something where you got to commit to looking at your shit. You got to really own those behavior patterns that are not the prettiest to look at, but are not serving you. They're not serving you. And underneath them, ultimately, at the bottom of a lot of those behavior patterns that are replaying at the cellular level, is fear. So a big component of my path of transformation was learning the art of facing fear as the pathway to liberation. And for me personally, I had a lot of fear of speaking my truth and backing myself up and taking risks. I had a lot of fear, unbeknownst to me. I also had a lot of courage, but that was a lot of what I spent my 20s doing, was just sitting in the light, sitting in these sacred spaces where I would just basically followed him around the world. I married him. I moved in with him. I just couldn't get enough. And I thousands and thousands of hours of putting myself in that sacred space so that I could allow that intelligence to keep taking those layers of the onion off, so to speak, to get underneath those behavior patterns that I just knew, my soul knew that if I didn't get them at the cellular level, I would be plagued for decades. There was nothing that was going to be able to access them. And I needed someone who also didn't take any shit, because a lot of my programs were very clever. A lot of my deep-seated, learned ego patterns were so brilliant and clever at deflecting truth and pushing help away and pushing love away, and in order to stay protected, and all those old protection mechanisms. So I needed someone that really knew their stuff to be able to test me and challenge me and confront me at the times I needed confronting, so that I could shatter those old cocoons, so to speak. So the process is very multifaceted. The cellular purification that I went through is really just it's a spiritual path. I mean, Buddha did it, Jesus did it, billions of souls have done it through the ages. Many of us today are doing it. And this was just my unique way of unraveling my history. Because what I've come to learn is when we are born into this body, with the point of conception, we take on genetically and epigenetically everything that our parents did not resolve and everything their parents did not resolve. All that unresolved trauma and karma, so we often use the word karma, but unresolved trauma and energetic patterns of contraction and fear that they didn't clean up, that they didn't want to look at, that they wanted to suppress under alcohol, or they wanted to suppress by projecting onto those around them with anger and control. It's stuff that was not looked at. It has to go somewhere. Energy is energy, and it has to go somewhere. And most of the time, if we're not consciously working on our stuff, which is not easy, that's the spiritual warrior. If we're not doing that, then that energy has to go somewhere, and typically it gets passed along to the next generation. So, I work with hundreds of people all over the world all the time, and I'm consistently, when that light comes through and starts unraveling their onions, so to speak, then I'm often seeing and burning off imprints of feeling and memory that, yes, are of this lifetime. Oftentimes they're childhood memories, but they go much deeper than that. There's stuff that has been epigenetically inherited, not just from this lifetime, but from our parents and grandparents and wider audience. So,
Wow. Okay, this sounds really, really interesting. And I have so many questions about how you then dated someone who was your teacher, but I'll leave that. I'll leave that train of thought for now. I love that you're talking about this, because as much as I know that just simply the awareness of a pattern can start to take the power out of it, it is really, you're still creating from the unconscious vibrational reality that you have. And so we need to clear it at that deeper level to be able to create something different in our world. So I'm really excited to be talking.
Absolutely.
So what does your life look like now? Are you purified? Are you done? Or you just have to keep doing it? And what does the external world look like for you as well?
I don't feel we're ever done. Any teacher that puts that out there is, I don't feel that's authentic. I'm going to be working on myself until I leave this body, and hopefully for the rest of infinity. So I'm always working on myself. But if I look over the last 18 years of all the work that I've been doing, there was a point after about 12 years of cooking in the light, constantly hardcore working on myself, there was this point where the fear or the death of old world mind inside of me, of all the stuff that I had taken on, and my most hardcore programs, there was a point where it felt like it went through its ultimate death, so to speak. And it was very painful, and I could certainly see why and understand wholeheartedly why many people never really cycle all the way through. The terror that I've faced, I mean, I, basically spent that whole time in a polyamorous environment and used that to unlock the terrors and unlock the jealousies and just the fears that were, definitely not just of this lifetime. There's no way the fears that I was facing night after night were just of my lifetime. It wasn't possible. Yes, I grew up in a war zone, but these were much older. These were collective fears. And I just kept hanging in there. And luckily, I guess the cleverness of my own soul was realizing that I created a kind of a no escape situation for myself. I have a beautiful daughter, and living in the middle of the hill country in Texas. And I guess I created my own cave in a way, the perfect cave or desert or whatever you want to call it, where I just had to sit and face the demons all the way. So there was a point where it seemed to break. And coincidentally, that was the point also then when the universe started bringing people to me. So the light broke through at a much higher level in my body. It's not that it wasn't coming through already in co-facilitating with my husband internationally for many years in our business, but it was at that point when I kind of went through this really loud death. It was almost as if all the work I had done was a build up to that point. And it was right on the heels of that then that people were brought to me for sessions. So they just started asking for sessions, and then it started to spread like wildfire, and got invited to do workshops internationally, and it just took off from there. But at this point, the way I look at it is, I may have cleaned out the stuff that was blocking me from living my passion, so to speak, or being out in the world doing my thing. But that's only stage one. Yeah, it took me, 3.5 decades, so to speak, to get that far. For some, they're lucky enough to have that when they come in. Some of us are lucky enough to feel that freedom of expression when we're 18, 20, For me, I had to do a lot of work to get to the basic point of just being able to express myself in the world. But I see that my work is just beginning. It's just beginning, because now it's, I may have cleaned out my cellular closet to a degree, but I'm not ever free so long as I'm in the body feeling, and because I'm going to feel everybody else's stuff that's around me. And I'm extremely psychic and extremely tuned in. And so to keep myself healthy, to keep my body freed up, I have no choice but to work with other people. I have no choice but to do this work. I know if I decided to take a sabbatical from life and from transforming and the process of alchemy that I teach, if I were to take time out from that, I would start going back into my old self. So really, it's not so much, in other words, I'd be doing it anyway. It's a process of keeping my own energy freed up, like yogis do yoga to keep their energy freed up, and meditators meditate to do that. Well, I do this alchemical healing process, because if I didn't, I feel like I'd go under.
Okay, thank you. And so for people listening from home, I guess I know, and I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to ask it for you anyway. How would they understand the cellular memories that they have, and what could be sitting there stored? Like, how does it show up in their body? How does it show up in their life? How do they know they've got cellular stuff going on?
Well, we all do.
That's what I thought might be the answer.
It's more got to do with, is it inhibiting you or not? And, a lot of people that I work with often say, I've been working on myself for years. I've done so many different modalities, and I'm starting to recognize that it must be cellular. Like, it must be something deeper that I just can't quite get to. So I guess the bottom line of what I offer, what I do is, and somebody summarized it beautifully once in New Jersey when I was doing a workshop there. She said, it's like doing therapy with God. So in a way, There's learning the art of getting out of our own way and working with a greater intelligence in the universe to come through and do therapy with us. So we all understand therapy. Most of us understand why therapy can serve and help. But we also oftentimes understand the limitations of regular therapy or group dynamic, and even healing modalities and body therapy and various things. And I see the reason for those limitations is because we're still trying to do it out of our own strength. So learning the art of getting out of the way and calling on and working with a greater intelligence that we all have access to. Nobody has a corner on it. Everybody, we come from it. We are it. We can work with it. But learning how to work with it and access it in a way that is tangible, physiological, undeniable, that's the key. And when you can do that, then it can get in and get a hold of those core traumas that you may have a whole personality trait built on top of a trauma that took place when you were 3, or you were, in the womb, or something that happened to your great grandmother that you're not consciously aware of, that's stored at the genetic level in your body. I mean, you may have a whole personality trait that expresses itself as a shyness or a fear of confrontation, or being overly confrontational, or afraid of having phobias. There are many, many ways. Fatigue, there are headaches, depression, self-doubt, big time, self-doubt, self-mistrust. It manifests in many different ways. If you're not feeling your true state, which is expansion, gratitude, and love, really. And I'm not talking about a corny, new agey kind of love. I'm talking love at the level that is potent and powerful. And when you're feeling it, people around you are transforming. That kind of love, that's our true state. And, it's that ocean of consciousness, really. And if you're not feeling that at any given moment in your day or night, then the chances are what's operating through you is the filter of that heavy cloak that you've taken on. So I guess it's up to us what way we choose to deal with that and how we choose to work on it, so to speak.
Okay, all right. There's so many different ways we can go into with this. So then as you start to tap into those cellular memories, and you said that you feel a lot of pain around that. And so when I've done breath work retreats and stuff, I went to one in particular and I called it death breath by the end of it. It was so painful. and I've also had some stuff that was really powerful and transformational and pleasurable. So I've had experiences where I learned just as much or cleared just as much, and they weren't painful. I'd love to hear what your version of the pain is. And I guess I would like to believe that we can expand without suffering. And I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the first very powerful message is you're not going to heal yourself if you're not willing to embrace the darkness. There's no way. That's a delusion. It's really a self-delusion. Because ultimately, whether it's collective social programming that we've been born into, religious conditioning and brainwashing, or familial brainwashing, or just personal experience that has caused us to shut down, we carry those imprints of fear and contraction at the deepest cellular levels. And if we want to transform them, then we gotta allow that original fear to unlock itself from the nucleus of the cell. It's got to unlock itself. And it doesn't mean, and I've watched this many, many times, it doesn't mean that we always have to relive the memory or we always have to feel the trauma. Not always. Sometimes the universe, the light, will go in there and grab a hold of it and pull it out. And you might experience the physiological tingles and body contractions. But most often, you have to have the courage to hold your history in the light. You got to hold it in the light. So I think that maybe using the word suffering might not be an apt word. It's because it's not necessarily suffering. I think suffering, the way I would define suffering, is when we're feeling the worst of the worst feelings and we're on our own with it. We don't have a relationship with this greater intelligence, this great therapist in the sky that's willing to come and actually do the alchemy for us. So to me, that's suffering. And I suffered the bottom of the bottom the first couple of decades of my life because I didn't have that. What I had to then face the next couple of decades of my life was equally as terrifying, and oftentimes more terrifying because I was feeling the fear more rather than the numbness and the disconnection. But there was a massive, massive difference. And that was, I was consciously with my eyes wide open, working with a greater intelligence, learning how to dialogue with it every day, how to call on it, what to do. When my deepest, darkest fears were coming out, how to work with them. I was learning all those spiritual tools and knowing that every single time I was facing those demons or those dark layers, it was the last time. It was the last time. I mean, I didn't always know that at the time, but in hindsight, I knew. So, it's not that we have to go back and suffer. I think it's a fine line that you don't want to go back and rehash things that have no energy in them. There's no point in, we're not victims. It's not about complaining. It's not about going back in there and beating a dead horse. It's about saying, okay, dear universe inside of me, dear precious self, I'm willing to do whatever it takes for you to reach your full potential in this lifetime, whatever it takes. So what do we have to face? What invisible cloak of old world mind, what ancestral baggage and inheritance are we carrying and storing in our body right now that is inhibiting us and our children and our friends and our community from becoming all of who we are, from reaching and tasting the highest vibration of love or potential or gratitude or connection that we can possibly taste in this lifetime. So it's more that attitude of saying, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And I think for a lot of us, when we're brought nose to nose with our own possible death, like the lack of being here, often that's a massive kickstart, a catalyst that gets us in that frame of mind, the spiritual warrior frame of mind that says, okay, bring it on, universe, I'm ready. And the alchemical process of transformation that I teach and that I've gone through, it's a co-creative one. There's this idea that we can show up in a workshop or we can go do some spiritual modality and kick back and drink a cocktail and have the teacher do all the work, or that's an illusion too. We have to do our work. So in a sense, a lot of us, definitely yourself and anyone who's on the path, part of our purpose for being here is to come in and take on the unconsciousness of our family patterning and our culture and the place we were born and the history that we were born into, to take it on, grow up through it, rub our noses in it, and then get to a point where we meet the universe and say, okay, all right, clean out my closet of everything that I'm wearing that is not love, that's not really me, so that I don't have to pass it along to my children. I don't want to pass it along to the next generation. I want it to stop with me. So that takes courage. It takes a lot of bravery, because I can tell you, if you're genuinely on the path of transformation, you are going to feel fear and you're going to feel discomfort most of the time. You're going to get snippets. The universe will put those carrots in front and give you these profound releases and amazing blissful highs and tantric awakenings and all that stuff. Like, it's going to do that. Of course it is, because that's what exists underneath that heaviness. But then it's going to say, okay, we just made room, that expanded self just made room to bring out the next layer of contraction. And we're going to keep going until we get to the heart of the onion, basically, till we get to the light.
I love how you explained your suffering for the first 2 decades of your life, because that is how I feel suffering is. So like the running away from the fear is actually more painful to me. Like the numbing of the fear or the creating of the stories or all of that stuff feels like more like suffering than, hey, I've got this stuff, and if I look at it and I accept it and I find a way to love it or transform it, then that feels like blissful pain, like painful bliss in a way, versus suffering.
That's right.
And in all of that, though, like one of my mentors said to me once, you're on an accelerated growth plan or something like that to me, that I signed up for, like accelerated growth. And I was like, can I renegotiate on that? Because it's a little bit tiring. And I feel like I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, in the whole expansion to contraction to, like, it does sometimes get tiring, which is hence why I've decided to give to myself a holiday for a month in the next month. But I'd love to hear how you handle those up, down, open, close, the growth journey and all that it entails.
I just keep getting out of the way. I just always say, okay, Great Spirit, intensify it. That's what I say, intensify it.
Wow.
And because and I say, Great Spirit, I want you to intensify it and shine light through it. And I say this a lot. This is one of the technique portions of what I do, is helping people to dialogue straight with the intelligence itself. A form of conscious prayer that actually works. And a lot of it is opening that doorway, and like you do, you know, and like many of us do. But the attitude is really important, the perspective and attitude of where we come from. And it's not meant to be easy. You know, my life is like a pressure cooker most of the time. I'm always feeling my sessions that are coming up the next day, or the workshops. Sometimes a week or two before a workshop in another country, I'm practically paralyzed and I am feeling everything, all the density that the universe is bringing to burn up in that fire of purification at least a week or two beforehand. And if I were to make it real, which I did in the early days, I would make all those feelings real, then I'd end up, I'd have a flu, or I'd be in the emergency room, because they're so thick. So I have learned how to not make the density real. So that is a meditation. That is a practice of, okay, Great Spirit, things are really intense. This is god awful, and I want you to intensify it. I want you to make it stronger, and I'm going to step aside and get out of the way. And I ask that you burn it up. I ask that you shine light through it and transform it, because it's not real. Ultimately, it's not real. And if we, on the other hand, try to control it and get in the way, we miss something valuable that we can learn as an alchemist. We miss the diamond that gets created and under that pressure. So it's like being able to be in observer consciousness and separate yourself from the most intense place and even hold that in the light. And part of how we do that is initially by dialoguing. Okay, Great Spirit, this is not real. This feels real, looks real, smells real. This is so intense. I don't know if I can take any more. Like, this is, intensify the overwhelm, intensify the panic, intensify the stress. You know, like I can't breathe. Bring it all out in the open and touch it with light right now. And you watch and see what happens. That if you give it time and give it a few minutes and give it 5-10 minutes to work with you, and you keep that dialogue open, it has very powerful effects.
It's actually exactly what I probably do when I feel too intense about things. I'm like, I've got nothing else, so it's just prayer, just like constant state of prayer until clear. And it always does, but it can feel so intense. I remember just recently, so this, I had like a really big, lots of intense stuff going on in my external world, and at the time that I was separating from my former partner, having a conversation with my mum, and she said she's not into personal development or spiritual stuff at all. She thinks I'm an alien. She loves me, but she thinks I'm an alien. And she said to me, maybe all of this personal development stuff isn't working. Like, you still feel so much like sadness and whatever else, and like it still seems so intense for you. And I was like, and it would in the other way, but I wouldn't know what to do if I was like trying to be asleep while I was feeling all of these things. I already felt them. I just felt alone in feeling of them. And I didn't feel like I had tools to deal with that.
Right.
And so I'd love for you to speak to the I mean, most of my listeners are probably quite sensitive as well. And like, there are times when I cry and I'm not even crying, like not for me, not for my clients. I'm crying for like the world for some reason. And I just let it go and don't know what's going on, but I just take a day, you know, or feel it. I'd love for you to talk to the people who are feeling sensitive in a world that doesn't understand or give time for that.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's a very fine line, because so many people who are very sensitive are not backing up their sensitivity. And that was my problem. That's why I was so ill. I had to learn to claim my power. I had to learn to back myself up. Because ultimately at the language of energy level, like this is a lot of what I studied and mastered, and you know, it's really it's really chi, but it's learning the language of energy. And what we don't realize is we are sponges. We're absorbing at the cellular, emotional, mental, physical level, every single thing that's going on around us. So if we go to work and we're around a lot of people who are quite disconnected, they're numb, they're hungover, they're stressed. You know, our kids go to school and they absorb everything that the teacher's dealing with and all the other kids and their parents. That's all, if you're as sensitive as I am, that you're going to feel that. And the way I dealt with it as a teenager, I didn't have any intellectual awareness of what was going on, but the way that I developed a coping mechanism, which was, okay, absorb the stuff. It was mirrored in eating food all day, and then I would throw it up in the toilet at night. That was my way of trying to get some kind of reprisal release from the pain. And a lot of us are, yes, tuning into the collective. We're picking up at levels of emotion that are happening worldwide that we're not even aware of half the time. And the advice that I would give to you, if you are a very sensitive soul, is that you've got to start trusting your intuition more. Because, you know, if you feel that emotions are getting the better of you and things are, it can be too much and it's too much of a weight on you, the reason is because you're not keeping your energy freed up. You're like a toilet that keeps getting pooped in, so to speak, but never gets flushed. So yes, obviously, the best way to do that is find sacred space, find places where people who are bringing through light in this way, where you can actually go sit in there and let the light clean you out. That's number one. But number two, keeping my energy freed up, I have got to be willing to face my fear of backing up my intuition all the time. All the time. My intuition being the feminine aspect of God, the feminine aspect of the universe inside of me. I have got to put her first at all costs, all the times. Be willing to risk my life for that. That's what I had to do to heal my bulimia. That's what I had to do to heal my chronic fatigue and my depression. And it took a while to consistently keep practicing it, because my super sensitive self that had absorbed tons of baggage and was still continuing to do so daily, would almost feel like it was putting the lights out. It was like a heavy, wet blanket that would put me down again. And I'd have to face more fear and take more risks of, okay, for example, like when I lived in Scotland, Edinburgh, I worked in a restaurant, and I was learning from my teacher at the time the importance of speaking my truth and expressing myself, facing the fear of being honest with what my intuition was dealing with. So rather than doing what everybody else was doing in work, which is the manager would say something that pissed everybody off and everybody just gossip about it. They just, fuck her kind of thing. Well, rather than do that, what I was learning, what the universe was teaching me is, no, go deal with it. Deal with it face to face, head on. And that was terrifying for me. Everything said, don't you dare, you will lose your job, you'll not be able to pay the rent. All the fears that you could imagine would kick up. I would say on average 3 times a week, I was convinced, going in the morning time, getting off the bus, convinced I was not going to have a job at the end of the day, because I was saying, okay, dear universe, whatever X person said to me yesterday that was a real dig, like it really put me down. It was a judgment of some kind. It felt insensitive. It felt heartless. I felt like I was just shunned or something. The old me was conditioned to just be okay with that. Like that's just normality. Everybody deals with that stuff. So I would numb out. Like I'd have to numb that pain of what I took on. So I had to learn to do something radically different. And I would go into work and I would go up to whomever the person may be and do my best with a white face and, just shaking in my boots, just walking through that fear and expressing my truth. I didn't always get it right. I'm sure I messed up a lot. I know I did. But something profound happened in my body and in my life. What I started learning and recognizing was when I would do that and face those fears, suddenly my bulimia feelings would go away. And like I call them bulimia feelings, the need to binge. And it would dissipate. I'm like, oh my God. So I started to recognize that those behaviors and the fatigue that would go with it and the depression and the suicidal feelings were directly related to fear. And so it was like the universe inside of me was saying, face your fear or disconnect and go dead, go numb. So for me, facing my fear was keeping my energy freed up. And a lot of people who are really sensitive have a very powerful intuitive. You are constantly reading the language of energy. You know what people are thinking and feeling. You might sense people are gossiping about you, or you might feel or recognize discrepancies and just feel uncomfortable or pissed off at a certain person who's racist or whatever it happens to be. But culture tells you what we've learned in school and from our family, zip up, say nothing. Don't take any action on it. Don't give that energy back.
And then in the personal development world, we're taught to look at that as a mirror. And so like some people would say, oh, well, what did that person say that for in your world? And so I know then I almost use that to like bully myself for a while.
Exactly.
I was like, oh, well, I called that in. And I couldn't see it as I called that in as an opportunity to speak my truth, for example. I would only see it as I called it in maybe back in those days, like because I was bad and I needed to see that I was like them. So can you talk about that almost like over responsibility to the point of hurting yourself?
Totally. Very big in the personal development world. Very big. But if you understand how energy works, then, which is why you've got to take the time to learn. I feel one of the most valuable languages that we need to learn is the language of energy. That's how the universe, God speaks to and through us, is through the understanding of the language of energy, which takes time to master. We are not taught it in our schools. We are not taught it in our religions. So if you understand how energy works, you'll recognize that, okay, this situation calls for me to take action and express my truth and give that projection of their stuff, their anger, their shame, their contraction, their self-hate that they just put onto me somehow, their unconscious pattern. They just dumped that onto me and it caused me to contract. So basically, the simplest way of looking at it is contraction versus expansion. If something happens in your environment, either to you or in the vicinity of your immediate environment, that causes you to contract, if you don't take some kind of action to take that contraction and turn it back into an expansion for yourself, where do you think that contracted energy goes? It's got to go somewhere. So it gets lodged in the cells as cellular memory, for one, and it manifests. We all have different ways of dealing with that pain of that contraction, right? So our job is to do whatever it takes to learn how to be the alchemist, turn lead into gold, fear into love, contraction into expansion. So for many of us, that'll be, oh, okay, I got to bite the bullet and I gotta learn how to speak my truth and be in my power and back myself up. But in some situations, the opposite may be true. In some situations, it may be to take ownership. It could be that person who was feisty and gave you a hit is hitting an ego pattern inside the self that you got to look at. But I know for you, I can certainly see in your energy field, Kiara, that your work is to trust yourself more and back yourself up more. Absolutely, without a doubt. Because a lot of the cobwebs and the sluggishness and heaviness that you feel in your body that really clearly goes against your nature, that's the part of you that is, you're hurting yourself with other people's energies. You're allowing, even at the subtlest level, there's a place where you're giving your power away, but not knowing it. And most of us are doing that. And that's what creates this, it's a lot of what creates, for many, obesity or carrying extra weight on the body. For a lot of us, that's what's underlying it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, you're totally right. It's the one thing that I'm working on the most at the moment is like, because I am super intuitive, and so many of the people who are listening would be the same. And we're just not taught to trust that when we're younger. And even it's kind of like it's an unseen thing. So it's like we're trusting this random voice inside of our head, but sometimes that random voice is our ego. And so for me, understanding which part is ego and which part is like divine guidance has been really crucial to that. Can you share? We need to wrap up soon. Actually, no, don't share about that. Do you know what I want to hear is like in the most brief and still profound way you can, just, no pressure. Can you share with us about the language of energy?
Yes, I can.
I thought you'd never ask, Kiara.
It's my passion. So one great way to define the language of energy is to look at, we have our senses that we're typically using, the 5 senses. We all know about the 6th sense, the intuitive self. Well, the language of energy is mastered through trusting the intuition. We all are connected to it. We're all listening to it on some level. Females typically are more connected to it than males, although it's not all the time. But the language of energy is basically when you start trusting your intuition, which I call the feminine. That's what I call the feminine aspect of the universe inside men and women. And it has nothing to do with being soft and pink and fluffy and all things that we associate with female, with the female traits. The divine feminine is an intelligence that's moving through us. And she is the language of energy. It's the creative intelligence that is behind all things. So, for example, when someone's speaking to you, you could be listening just with the ears on your head. You could be watching them just with the eyes on your head. But what they're saying with their words could be completely split and disconnected from what their body is saying and what they're expressing at the language of energy level. So for me, the biggest transformation that happened in my life is no longer trusting just what I was hearing with the ears on my head and observing around me with my 5 senses, but starting to put more faith and more trust in that language of energy level, the intuitive. And so that's really where my gift has come from, because I'm every time I drop down to that level, that language of energy level in my world, and I speak to it and I speak from it, then it gets people's attention. It gets the cells start to perk up and wake up, because that's where things are really happening. The other is the ego. The other is lesser mind. That's a disconnection from greater mind. Greater mind being the Dantian, or the Hara in the center, which is just below our belly button, our 2nd chakra. And that's where we want to learn to speak from. That's where we want to learn to listen from. In a sense, we have a much greater intelligence that its brain or its muscle is down in the center, just below the belly button. And we're raised in environments that split us constantly. And so if we're easily seduced because we're disconnected from greater mind, from the language of energy inside the self, we are at the mercy of all kinds of charlatans and all kinds of programs and behavior patterns around us that are seducing us all the time to disconnect from ourselves. But when we take the time to learn to trust our intuitive self and start to speak from that place and back it up, which is why I express the importance of speaking our truth, that strengthens that muscle. It tones that brain in the center. And people, it's hard to be messed with. There's a power there. It's really what the old Taoist masters have realized. It's really what any master has realized, whatever way they climb up the mountain to get to it. it's a mastery of a very deep-rooted place of power in the self. So if you really want to realize your power in your lifetime, the power of actually love, really, that's going to help you find your true self and your calling, then you've got to develop a relationship with your intuition and learn to trust it, period.
Beautiful. That is what we're going to end on. That was a really powerful share. Thank you, Jennifer. Everything you've shared is so powerful. And I know that I, for one, will definitely want to contact you about how I can continue to work with you. You know, when you said when you speak from that level, their cells perk up, like the minute that you started talking, my cells perked up. I was like, oh, I'm meant to work with her. So clear to me. So how can people come to find out more about you? I know you run events all over the world as well. How do they find out all about that?
Well, you can go to my website, jenniferhanson.org, and it's HANSON, jenniferhanson.org. And I do podcasts, webinars regularly, which you will find on there, but also cyber groups. I typically do in-person circles wherever I go in the world, but do cyber when I'm home in Texas, which is great. It's a great way to, it's just a 3-hour session. You can check in. Again, it's on the website. Just go to cyber groups. Or private sessions. I do this, I use Zoom as well, this medium, this interface that we're using right now. I use this and do sessions every day with people all over the world. The light pours through, the energy comes through, and magic happens.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you to everyone who was listening to this podcast as well, because I love that I get to talk to people like Jennifer, because then she wants to talk with you. So thank you for allowing me to do this. And thank you for doing this work on yourself. I think I say that most weeks at the moment, but I just am so grateful that there are people out there doing this work, because as Jennifer was saying, when we can clear ourselves, then we can clear like the rest of the world. And it does take people like us who are courageous enough to do the work that we can start to really make an impact. So if you would like to head on over to Facebook, and you can come and join Jennifer and I and ask us any questions that you might have about the podcast, anything that comes up. We have a discussion each week in the Lightworkers Rising Facebook group page, so you can find mine and Jennifer's beautiful faces and come and ask us questions if you like there. Just type in Lightworkers Rising on Facebook and find us that way. And if you found this podcast valuable, which I definitely did, so I'm sure that you did too, then you can hit share and share it with your community, because there may just be someone that you love right now who needs to hear this. It might be the option for cellular purification, or it might be that they can take action and not, think that they attracted everything into their life because it's inside. Like that over responsibility thing is a key one. If you feel called, I would love for you to hit share so that other people can know about this as well. And now Jennifer and I are going to go over to record her secret episode of what her life is like behind the scenes. This is where I get to ask the juicy questions, like what is your morning routine like, and what are you being challenged with at the moment in your life? And maybe I'll even get to ask, what is it like to date your teacher? How do you manage that part? So please head to aninspiredlife.com.au/secret if you would like access to Jennifer and I discussing the behind the scenes in her life. Thank you everyone so much. Thank you again, Jennifer, and I will see you all next week.
Bye.
You have been listening to the An Inspired Life podcast with me, Kiara O'Leary. I'm so excited to be guiding you on your own journey of living your own version of an inspired life. Head over to aninspiredlife.com.au if you want access to more inspiring stories, tips, tools, frameworks, anything that I can possibly give you that will help you live a more fulfilling life. I've put on there, and so much of it is free. And there's also empowering life solutions from the Sacred Business Academy, taking it from an idea to your life's work in only 11 weeks. So I hope you can head on over to aninspiredlife.com.au and find something that will help you and guide you for where you're at right now. Thank you. My name's Kiara again, and I am so grateful to be guiding you on this journey. See you next time.